There's a specific kind of silence that settles in on Christmas Day when you're alone. It doesn't announce itself with fanfare or obvious sadness. It lives in the absence of the sounds everyone else is experiencing, the laughter from another room, the chaos of wrapping paper being torn, the kitchen filled with people moving around each other preparing food. Instead, there's just the quiet hum of your own space, the awareness that this day that's supposed to be about togetherness is happening to you in solitude. Maybe you know someone who spends Christmas alone. Maybe it's you, that person who navigates December 25th without the gatherings, without the traditions, without the people that the entire culture assumes everyone has waiting for them somewhere. Most people think spending Christmas alone means something went wrong, that you're lonely, isolated, estranged from family, somehow failed at maintaining the relationships that are supposed to carry you through holidays. But psychology tells a more complicated story. For most people who spend Christmas alone, the situation isn't simple and the emotions aren't singular. Some genuinely prefer it that way. Others have no choice. Many exist in the complicated space between those extremes, where the solitude is chosen but still carries weight, where the quiet is welcome but also heavy, where being alone feels both like relief and like evidence of something missing. The experience doesn't fit into neat categories. It's layered, contradictory, often misunderstood by people whose Christmases have never looked like this. Here's the part that makes people with big family celebrations uncomfortable. Being alone on Christmas doesn't always mean suffering. For some people, it means finally not having to perform joy they don't feel, not having to navigate family dynamics that drain them, not having to pretend that this holiday carries the magic and meaning that culture insists it should. They tried the traditional celebrations for as long as they could. They showed up to gatherings that felt obligatory rather than joyful. They participated in rituals that everyone else seemed to find meaningful, but that left them feeling empty and exhausted. And every time they forced themselves through another Christmas that looked right from the outside but felt wrong from the inside, they learned the same lesson. That going through the motions of celebration without genuine feeling is more lonely than being physically alone. And what's fascinating is that the brain processes forced celebration differently than genuine connection. Research on emotional authenticity shows that participating in activities that don't match your internal state creates cognitive dissonance that's actually more stressful than opting out entirely. When you're pretending to be festive while feeling nothing, or pretending to be grateful while feeling resentful, or pretending to enjoy yourself while counting the hours until you can leave, your nervous system registers that disconnect. This isn't just preference. This is physiological response to inauthenticity. The human emotional system is designed to seek congruence between internal experience and external expression. And when Christmas becomes an extended exercise in performing feelings you don't have for people who expect you to have them, something breaks down. This is why some people who spend Christmas alone say something that sounds shocking to people who love the holiday. I'm actually happier this way. Not because they hate joy or connection or celebration, but because the internal experience of being alone and honest feels better than being surrounded by people, while feeling isolated by the gap between what you're supposed to feel and what you actually feel. That preference doesn't mean they're damaged. It means their relationship to Christmas doesn't match the cultural script, and they've chosen authenticity over performance. Psychologists call this self-congruence or authentic living, but those terms don't capture what it actually feels like. The relief of not having to pretend, the freedom of structuring the day however you want, the permission to acknowledge that this day is just a day, not the magical experience that commercials and movies promised it would be. But here's where the experience becomes complicated, because even people who choose to spend Christmas alone often carry complicated feelings about that choice. On one hand, there's genuine relief, actual preference for solitude. On the other hand, there's the weight of existing outside what society considers normal. The awareness that choosing to be alone on Christmas signals something to other people about your life, your relationships, your success at being human. And holding both of those truths simultaneously creates internal tension that people with traditional celebrations never have to navigate. You can prefer being alone and still feel the sting of cultural judgment about being alone. You can genuinely not want to be at a family gathering and still feel the loss of not having a family gathering you'd want to be at. Many people spending Christmas alone aren't there by pure choice. Sometimes it's circumstance. Family lives too far away and travel isn't feasible. Sometimes it's estrangement. The relationships exist technically, but are too damaged or toxic to maintain during an emotionally charged holiday. Sometimes it's loss. The people who made Christmas meaningful are gone, and celebrating without them feels impossible. Sometimes it's life stage. You're between communities, between relationships, in a transition where the old connections have fallen away and new ones haven't formed yet. And sometimes it's just the math of life. You don't have family, you don't have a partner, your friends have their own families. And the day that's built entirely around the assumption that everyone has people simply arrives, and you're alone, not because you did anything wrong, but because your particular constellation of circumstances doesn't include the people the holiday requires. At first, people facing Christmas alone try to solve it. Maybe I can find somewhere to go. Maybe I can volunteer. Maybe I can create my own traditions that make it feel less empty. Then they try reframing it. Maybe being alone is actually good. Maybe I'll use the time productively. Maybe this is an opportunity for peace and reflection. Then they try acceptance. Maybe it's okay to just get through the day. Maybe it doesn't have to be special. Maybe I can treat it like any other day, and that's enough. And finally, after enough Christmases spent alone, it becomes less loaded. Not painless necessarily, but familiar. This is just what Christmas looks like for me now. What's rarely discussed is how that familiarization doesn't eliminate the emotional complexity. Because spending Christmas alone becomes easier with practice, but it never becomes neutral. There's always some awareness that the day carries significance for everyone else, that the world has essentially paused for a celebration you're not part of, that there's a specific kind of loneliness that only exists on days when being alone marks you as outside the norm. Even people who genuinely prefer solitude can feel the weight of Christmas alone in ways that other days of solitude don't carry. The loneliness isn't about wanting to be at a gathering necessarily. It's about the awareness of your exception status, the feeling that your life is being judged by its absence of the exact thing this day is supposed to be about. Psychologically, this is called social comparison or awareness of deviation from norm. And on Christmas, when the norm is so heavily reinforced through every commercial, every movie, every song, every social media post of families gathered around trees, the deviation becomes impossible to ignore, even if you've made peace with it in every other context. Because humans are wired to notice when they're outside group behaviour, especially around ritually significant events. From childhood, most people absorb the message that Christmas is the most important family day of the year, that it's when people come together, when love is expressed through presence and tradition, when belonging is both demonstrated and reinforced through participation in specific rituals. So when someone spends Christmas alone, even by choice, their mind often asks some version of the same questions. What does this say about my life? What does it mean that I don't have what everyone else seems to have? Am I okay with this, or am I just telling myself I'm okay with it because accepting it is easier than acknowledging how much I wish it were different? And those questions carry weight because they're asking something deeper than just how you spend one day. They're asking whether your life is working, whether you've built the connections that matter, whether you're succeeding at the fundamental human task of creating and maintaining relationships. This is where the internal experience becomes painful, even for people who consciously chose solitude. Because on one side, there might be genuine relief, at not having to deal with difficult family dynamics, or genuine preference for quiet, or genuine satisfaction with how you're spending the day. And on the other side, there's this persistent cultural message that your way of spending Christmas is evidence of lack, of failure, of something fundamentally wrong with your life. Studies on holiday stress and well-being show something important. People who spend holidays alone report complex emotional states that don't fit simple categories. They're not uniformly sad. They're not uniformly content. They're often both simultaneously experiencing relief and loss, peace and loneliness, freedom and isolation, all mixed together in ways that are hard to articulate to people who've never experienced it. But here's the psychological truth that doesn't get enough attention. The hardest part of spending Christmas alone often isn't the actual alone time. It's the time leading up to it. It's December, when every interaction includes the question of what you're doing for the holidays, and you have to decide whether to tell the truth and watch people's faces change, or lie and avoid the pity or concern or judgment that truth invites. It's the weeks of Christmas music and decorations and commercials all reinforcing that this is a time for gathering, for family, for togetherness. It's the social media filled with photos of celebrations you're not part of. It's the feeling that the entire world is preparing for something communal, and you're preparing for another day of regular solitude with the added weight of it happening on a day when solitude is seen as tragedy. The day itself is often easier than the anticipation of it. The actual December 25th, for many people, is just quiet. Sometimes lonely, sometimes peaceful, sometimes both, but manageable. It's the cultural build-up, the constant reinforcement of what Christmas is supposed to look like and who's supposed to be there, that makes the aloneness feel heavy. And that's a distinction people with traditional celebrations rarely understand. They think Christmas alone must be devastating. In reality, it's often December that's hard, and Christmas Day itself is just the culmination of a month of being reminded that your experience doesn't match the narrative, and grief around unmet expectations changes how people approach not just Christmas, but the entire holiday season. Research shows that people who spend holidays alone often develop coping mechanisms, ways of getting through December that minimize exposure to holiday messaging, that create alternate structures for the day, that reframe what the time means. Some work on Christmas, grateful for the distraction. Some treat it like any other day, deliberately not marking it as special. Some create solo traditions that have meaning independent of the cultural expectations. Some leave town entirely, going somewhere where Christmas isn't the dominant cultural force, and some just survive it, getting through December 25th and feeling relief on December 26th when the pressure finally lifts. Another misunderstood aspect is this. People assume spending Christmas alone means having no relationships, no connections, no people who care about you. In reality, it often means something more nuanced. Maybe you have relationships, but they're distant geographically. Maybe you have connections, but they're all with people who have their own families, and Christmas is when those primary obligations take precedence. Maybe you have people who care about you, but not in a configuration that translates to holiday gathering. Maybe you're simply at a life stage where the relationships that create family holidays haven't formed yet or have dissolved. The aloneness doesn't necessarily reflect the overall quality of your relational life. It reflects the specific structure that Christmas requires and that your life doesn't currently contain. As children, many people built associations with Christmas, what it should feel like, what it should include, who should be there. Those early templates become what the brain expects, what feels like real Christmas. As adults, when current reality doesn't match that template, there's grief, even if current reality is chosen and preferred. The loss isn't always about wanting to return to how things were. Sometimes it's about mourning the gap between what you were taught Christmas should be and what it actually is for you. And naming that grief doesn't resolve it. Understanding why Christmas feels loaded doesn't make it feel less loaded. What was once just a day marked by tradition becomes a day marked by the absence of tradition, by the awareness of distance between expectation and reality. That shift is powerful, and it persists because culture never stops reinforcing what Christmas is supposed to look like. Every year, the same messages, the same imagery, the same assumption that everyone has somewhere to go and someone to be with. And every year, people spending Christmas alone have to navigate the gap between that assumption and their reality. Some years it feels manageable, other years it feels crushing. The experience isn't static, it changes based on what else is happening in life, what losses are fresh, what loneliness is already present before Christmas amplifies it. Here's something rarely acknowledged. People who spend Christmas alone often wonder if they're doing something wrong, if there's something they should be doing differently that would result in having the traditional experience, if other people have figured out some secret to building and maintaining the relationships that make holidays full, and theirs just haven't. The wondering becomes another layer of difficulty, not just the aloneness, but the self-interrogation about whether the aloneness is somehow your fault, whether you failed at something fundamental, whether being alone on Christmas is evidence that you're not living life correctly. That self-judgment is often more painful than the actual solitude. The solitude is just empty time. The self-judgment is existential questioning about whether your life is working, whether you're enough, whether you've somehow failed at being human in ways that reveal themselves most clearly on the day when everyone else seems to have what you don't. And those questions don't have clean answers. Sometimes the aloneness is circumstantial and temporary. Sometimes it reflects choices that were right for you even though they led to this outcome. Sometimes it reflects limitations, yours or others, that couldn't be overcome. The mind wants simple causation. Reality offers complexity that doesn't resolve into clear blame or clear innocence. From a psychological standpoint, people spending Christmas alone are navigating what's called ambiguous loss or non-normative stress. The situation doesn't fit the templates society provides for understanding difficulty. It's not dramatic enough to warrant obvious sympathy, but it's not neutral enough to be easily dismissed. It exists in uncomfortable middle space where the pain is real but not validated, where the preference might also be real but is still coloured by loss. And that ambiguity makes the experience harder to process because you can't locate it clearly as either chosen or imposed, either painful or peaceful, either something to change or something to accept. Many people develop complicated relationships with Christmas as a result. They're not against the holiday exactly. They're against the cultural assumption that their experience of it should match everyone else's. They're against the pity they receive when people learn they're alone. They're against the pressure to manufacture meaning out of a day that in their lived experience is just another day of solitude with extra cultural weight attached. And that resistance to the mythology of Christmas creates its own isolation, because you can't really express ambivalence about Christmas in December without being seen as Scrooge-like, as damaged, as someone who needs fixing or healing or saving from their own supposedly sad situation. But there is one part of spending Christmas alone that can offer unexpected gift: the clarity. When you're alone on a day built for gathering, you see very clearly what you have and what you don't. What connections actually exist versus what connections you imagined existed. What matters to you when stripped of all the performance and obligation? Who reaches out and who doesn't? What you genuinely miss versus what you think you're supposed to miss. That clarity can be devastating. It can also be clarifying in ways that eventually lead to building something different, something more aligned with what you actually want, rather than what you're supposed to want. The psychology of people who spend Christmas alone is not about being lonely versus being content. It's about navigating the gap between cultural expectation and personal reality. The gap between what this day is supposed to mean and what it actually means when you're experiencing it in solitude. The gap between what the silence contains, peace or pain or both, and what observers assume the silence means. And perhaps the most important truth is this: most people spending Christmas alone are doing the best they can with circumstances that don't match the template society provides. They're not refusing joy. They're refusing to perform joy they don't feel. They're not rejecting connection. They're accepting that the specific kind of connection Christmas requires isn't currently available to them. They're not failing at life. They're living a version of life that doesn't include the gathering the calendar says should be there. And that reality, however they feel about it, deserves acknowledgement without judgment. Quieter than the celebrations happening elsewhere, more complex than it appears from outside, not chosen by everyone who lives it, not tragic for everyone experiencing it, just different, just real, just what December 25th looks like when the people aren't there and the traditions don't fit, and the day arrives anyway and you navigate it alone.